Welcome to the Veritas podcast. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm joined by comedian, podcaster, and YouTuber Vito Gesualdi. Vito, thanks for being on the show.
I'm excited to be here. I'm so every part of my body is ready for this.
Well, Vito, I appreciate the enthusiasm. It's good to have you. I've been excited to talk to you. You've kind of been in my orbit for a while, following you on Twitter, seeing some of your content on YouTube, but then you kind of crashed into my world when the sort of Dave Chappelle Netflix thing happened. But for people that don't know, do you want to just talk a little bit about who you are, why you make the kind of content that you make, and also how did you end up in the position where you kind of got mobbed in front of Netflix headquarters last year over a freaking comedy special that people were protesting?
Well, the easiest way to put it is I'm an idiot. I do these things and I don't even know why I do them. I claim that it's for comedy, and at the end of the day, I think there's just something wrong with my head. But I'm a man. I make videos on the internet. I think they're funny. My audience seems to think they're funny. You check them out at youtube.com/Vito. I have some other projects that are fun, but I saw that everybody was mad at Dave Chappelle because Dave Chappelle told some jokes about the transgender community. I don't want to be mean to the transgender community. I have great respect for what they go through, and I'm sure they face adversity, but they seem to not have a sense of humor about themselves. And they were very mad that Dave was joking about them and talking about them and calling him a bigot and saying he's going to get them killed. I think everybody's trying to kill them constantly. And I was like, listen, man, Dave Chappelle's a comedian. He tells jokes. He's not trying to murder trans people. Why don't we talk about this, rationally and fairly? And they didn't do that. They decided to have a protest at the Netflix building, trying to get Netflix to either pull his special or apologize for it or say we won't ever have this kind of hate on our platform again. I don't know exactly what they wanted, but it was an anti-Dave Chappelle protest. And as a comedian and someone who supports comedy, I was like, you know what? I want to go down there. I think there's a part of this debate that's not being heard. And I want to show support for the great Dave Chappelle. So me and my friend, Dick Masterson, who I host a podcast with called The Biggest Problem in the Universe podcast, we made up some signs that said we like jokes. We like Dave. Dave is funny. Jokes are funny. And we went to the protest and we held up our very offensive transphobic signs.
Yeah, very provocative stuff.
Yeah, the horrifically transphobic message of Dave Chappelle is funny. And we ended up getting attacked by the crowd. One guy, ripped my sign out of my hands. Some Antifa guy tried to beat up Dick. And it ended up being quite an experience. Let's put it that way.
Yes, and I wouldn't want to leave out the amazing detail that when your sign was broken, the person who broke it started screaming that you had a weapon, which is something that comes right out of like a sketch.
It was that guy, and it's funny, the guy who did that, who first of all grabbed my sign and broke it, and then as I'm standing there holding half a sign, because it's been, broken in half, I'm holding the empty stick that the sign was attached to. He goes, oh, look, he's got a weapon. He brought a stick to beat us all up. And I'm like, I didn't bring a stick this is what the sign was attached to. I don't have a weapon. This guy had a whole, 200 IQ plan. Luckily for me, I think everybody realized that I was harmless and just an idiot who had a sign. They tried to accuse me of having a weapon. And the guy who did this, his name's Joe Cristalli. He's a comedy writer. He's supposed to support his fellow comedians. He's currently the head writer for the Frasier reboot, coming to, I don't know, Crackle, Paramount. Who cares? There's a million of these fucking things. But I couldn't believe that a fellow comedian was trying to get me killed by falsely claiming I had a weapon. And it's a very sad time we live in when that's the case.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me about this type of situation is that these people are so unhinged, and yet there's a lot of deference to them and a lot of submission to them. People are always making concessions. I know in this case, the Dave Chappelle special in question, I think it's called Closer or The Closer.
Yeah,
it's still up. So that didn't get removed. But in a lot of cases, these things do end up, these campaigns actually are successful. These types of protests, things get removed, things get taken down. Like I recently saw Louis C.K. in Chicago, and I was afraid that show was going to get canceled just because of, his whole situation. Well, my question to you, Vito, is why do you think that like this type of person who is completely unhinged, why is there so much deference and submission to them? It always makes me imagine somebody going to a negotiating table and just like slamming a sledgehammer into the middle and screaming for an hour, and then people being like, yes, yes, like we'll do whatever you want, please. Like, why does that happen? It blows me away.
Well, the problem is that we, as a society, we had this, I don't know what it was. There was a point in time where you didn't want to be seen as a racist, right? I mean, I think still it's that way. We are very much a society that is built upon perceptions. And it doesn't matter if you have the biggest heart in the world and you're the greatest guy. As long as somebody can forge the perception that you're evil, the perception is more powerful than the truth. So people no longer care about the truth. You know in your heart that you're not a homophobe or a bigot or a racist, but you are deathly afraid of someone being able to paint you as such. And that's how these mobs seize control. They know the power that fear has. And especially, it seems, with the transgender community, they've managed to make themselves into the hot button, what do you want to say, most marginalized group of the hour. Despite the fact that I would say, I mean, I look at what's happening to the black community and the murder rates, and I'm like, what about black people? We should help black people. And they're like, no. Trans people are the ones, we're the ones under attack. I'm like, if you say so, the numbers don't add up here. So they've made themselves I mean, this is the new gay rights. They've taken on the role in society of the gay rights was previously, the hot button issue or whatever you want to say. And you as anybody who wants to have a career, especially in Hollywood or any sort of creative industry, the idea of being painted as a bigot is the scariest thing in the world to you. And that's why these people just go along with it. I mean, this is how they know they can get in with Netflix and they can get specials pulled and they can control who gets a voice, is because all these executives and creatives go, you know what? I just want a job. I don't want to take a stand for anything. I don't want to fight with these people. Just give them whatever they want as long as I'm okay. Even when they're making the most unreasonable demands, again, saying, well, we want the most popular comedian in America to have his content pulled.
Yeah.
And that's an example of them going too far. They've finally started to realize that the hammer they wield is not nearly as big or effective as they wanted it to be. They're like, we can cancel Harry Potter. I'm like, good fucking luck with that, buddy. I don't think you're canceling Harry Potter anytime soon. I don't care what you think about J.K. Rowling. So this is where we're at right now, is that there's a very loud group, which I'm not going to say, yes, the transgender community suffers a variety of indignities and injustices, and that should be addressed. But the greatest threat facing the transgender community is not comedians and British authors. They need to pick better battles, and they need to stop getting so upset when people tell them this.
Yeah, it does seem like there's this strategy of just sort of making someone radioactive, and that very few people are able to handle that pressure without sort of bending the knee. Because like you said, people want to have a job, and we've actually seen it trickle down to where you don't even have to be in a creative industry or an entertainment industry for this to affect you. There are people with desk jobs. There was a guy who I think was like a trucker in June of 2020, and he did this, which is a terrible racist symbol, as we all know. If you go, for the audio listeners, I'm holding up what you might know as the OK sign. And and he was fired from his truck driving job. And it's just like, the thing that's interesting about this,
I can't have a racist driving a truck or what I'm like,
it wouldn't even affect his performance,
right? No, he'll probably be better at it because he's got something to focus on. All his hatred while he's on the road, he's got something to think about.
It'll fuel him on his 14-hour drives.
He won't nod off at the wheel because he's full of hate. I don't know, and I don't lose sleep thinking about it either. Like, yes, I don't want racists in society, but I'm also not going to try and hunt them down with like secret little hand signals or, oh, well, he said this, but he might have meant this. There's a lot of this weird insane presumption that everybody's using secret codes to be racist and sexist and homophobic. I think we can stop trying to look for secret codes. And again, why don't we just focus on guys who are actual monsters, politicians who are trying to pass laws that maybe impact communities disproportionately. But no, we're going after truck drivers and authors and comedians, and it's frankly insanity.
Do you think the type of person who is doing this because they actually think like, oh my God, this truck driver needs to lose his job, or a black person could be harmed in some way? Or do you think it's more so kind of a getting my chunk of flesh, getting a piece of the cancel culture pie, maybe getting some clout? Like maybe this one guy, he has kind of the guy you were describing who broke the sign, he has maybe some kind of, maybe he was trying to make himself look a certain way to score brownie points. Do you think it's more about personal gain or more about genuine moral righteousness in their minds?
I think what has happened is that we are a very tribalistic society. Not society, just creature. The human animal has always craved some sort of tribalism. You want to belong, and the best way to belong is to pick a common enemy and go at their throat. So I think what we're running into is a people who don't have a real sense of community in their lives and have kind of latched on to these forms of activism as a way to kind of stand in for that. And it really is just, I need to unload my anger and my anxieties on another person, and I would like a socially acceptable target. And we've gone, well, here's a socially acceptable. You're allowed to hate these people. And they go, oh, thank God, because I need to hate somebody or I'm going to go crazy. And that's kind of where we're at. It's the same with the left-right schism, the Democrat-Republican schism, is that we've taken what used to be, it's politics. We have different opinions on politics. It used to not be this contentious. Now we've turned each side into a religion. You have to subscribe to all the same ideas as your chosen religion. If you step outside the lefty sphere or the righty sphere, it happens on both sides, you are pilloried and crucified. And it really is a bunch of people who I think are sadly seeking community in the wrong places. And it's very unhealthy. They want a target, and they don't realize that even if the target seems morally correct to you, you're not doing this I don't think you're doing this for the right reasons. I think you are doing this out of a misguided sense of wanting to have something you can easily hate.
Yeah, and that is sort of it's sort of primordial. It's something that is, as you were kind of suggesting, a part of human nature. And what's so interesting about what you said is that it suggests, and I think you're right to say this, that this isn't like a uniquely left-wing phenomenon. This is something that can happen to with someone of any political persuasion. The tribalness is something that it's pretty much universal, but there's an interesting thing that we see where there are certain types of people that are less susceptible to it than others. Like I would argue from what I know about you, Vito, that you're less susceptible to this type of, I don't think I've ever seen you going on like a cancel campaign. Why do you think that is, that some people are less susceptible to it than others, even though it can affect anyone?
That's a good question. It really comes down to what do you want, again, with this tribalism idea? Like, what are you in need of as a human being? And for some people, again, it seems to be, well, I'm lacking for somewhere to vent, somewhere to get out my frustrations about my own life or the society in general. I don't like the way society is structured. I'm lucky that I think I have different ways to vent. I don't get enjoyment out of, I don't know, true hatred of people, or the people I hate. I have very specific reasons why I hate them. I focus my hatred. I don't like liars. I don't like people, especially now we live in the age of misinformation on social media, people inventing news stories, people inventing the truth. And even here with this Dave Chappelle thing, I don't hate, let's be very clear, I don't hate the transgender community. I don't even hate the people who showed up to that protest. I hate the people who are deliberately inventing statistics, inventing information, or exaggerating the extent of the harm being caused. When you say Dave Chappelle is killing trans people, I mean, I have to hope you're just misguided, but I think there's some people out there who know that is not true, who are only saying that because they think that the ends justify the means, that, well, for the greater good, convincing people that this is murder to make jokes is somehow worthy. So that's who I choose to focus my anger on, is people who I think are truly causing harm. But again, I can't even say that anger is the right emotion to have. I mean, it's just something that we as human beings, I think, need to grapple with. is I mean, we lived in tribes and we fought over, access to the cleanest spring and the freshest berries, and it's still a latent problem that we have, this tribalism, this need to find an other that we can fight with. So I don't know who it affects more or less, but it is something you need to sit down, I think, and go, am I angry at these people for a good reason, or am I angry at these people out of a misplaced need to just be angry?
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. And just so you know, I can relate to you 100% on the thing with like the thing that always, I know what makes me angry. I'll go ahead and use the word angry. When I'm on Twitter and I see somebody spreading awful misinformation that is designed to harm a specific person, especially if it's someone that I like, it infuriates me. And the interesting thing about that is it does put me in a space where I'm thinking, and especially if it's someone who is a journalist, because they, in theory, their job is to tell the truth, which it just makes me laugh at this point. But the interesting thing is it does put me in a place where I think like this person maybe should lose their job. And that is kind of a cancel culture kind of mindset. But what you brought up is that the value that is sort of the foundation for that mindset, or the motivation for it, is different depending on the person. In my case, it's somebody who actually is knowingly telling falsehoods with the intent of harming another person, which is such a, if you allow that to happen on a wide enough scale, society falls apart. We are seeing that process, unfortunately, unfold. And the really interesting thing about this is that there's nothing inherently wrong with feeling angry towards a person, or even having some kind of collective action. That's the nice way of saying mob, maybe, right? But what really matters is the values behind them, because this whole thing with Dave Chappelle, the idea behind it is that comedy causes harm to trans people, or sometimes it'll be Black people, women, whoever. And I just feel like comedy never really, I can't think of a single way, even hypothetically, that comedy could really cause harm. Is there anything that you would say actually crosses the line to where it would be acceptable to censor or ban something that is like comedy, as someone who talks about this kind of entertainment stuff a lot?
Well, I think it's very possible to have a comedy culture which, could perpetuate certain stereotypes, which is, something that we've grappled with. So you kind of have to look at what the structure of the joke is and what purposes it's solving. If you make a joke about Asian people or whatever, Black people, are you coming at it from the perspective of, hey, listen, I love and I respect these people, but this is a fun an interesting thing about their culture that might seem out of place, and we can joke about it and understand that ultimately, different cultures are different? Or are you coming at it from the perspective of, look at how dumb Asian people are, look at how dumb Black people are, let's mock them for their inherent racial traits, whatever else. So that is a kind of comedy that I would not even consider that. I mean, you can call it a joke, but I clearly think it's out of place. And if a comedy club or a television network says, yeah, we don't want a bunch of jokes about how stupid Mexican people are, frankly, you should be more clever and find jokes that are not denigrating a community. It's not to say you can't, again, poke. Like, one thing that people constantly come down on recently has been this idea that, accents are offensive, like Apu on The Simpsons. How could you mock the way that Indian people talk? And I always go, accents are, if you go to another country, I guarantee right now they are cracking jokes about American accents. Then the joke is not, oh, Apu is a stupid person because he doesn't speak perfect English. And honestly, the accent is not even really the comedic part of that character. It's just we as the human race are instinctively drawn towards interesting sounds, interesting ways of talking that we haven't heard before. And I think accents can be funny just because they're foreign, they're different. And again, it's something you don't encounter all the time in your typical American life, or whatever you want to call it. So it really comes down to the kind of misinformation that I'm really worried about is this idea of exaggerating harm, because I'm willing to say that there are jokes that might cause harm to the transgender community by, spreading bad ideas about what they want or who they are. Sure. But when you exaggerate the harm and say, and that joke, which maybe was a little insensitive or maybe could have reined it in or talk, okay, we can have that discussion. But when you exaggerate the harm to say this will directly lead to children killing themselves, I have to go, well, we're not having a rational discussion anymore. Okay, I was perfectly willing to listen to why blackface is not okay and how it historically. Sure, let's talk about that. But the second you tell me blackface results in, millions of people getting murdered, I go, well, we're not having a real discussion now. We have to be willing to talk about these topics, and we can't get wrapped up in this extreme hyperbole. And that's part of what has really driven me nuts about the transgender community's issue with comedy, is that I don't think they are. I don't think they're being very honest about the actual impacts of what's going on.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because you will find, there are trans people. I mean, Dave Chappelle kind of talked about this in his special a little bit. There are trans people that can appreciate, jokes about themselves and are or want to talk about it in a more nuanced way, as you were kind of suggesting. But it does seem like the broad transgender activist community has this really overdramatic way of latching onto these things. And to be fair, this isn't just unique to the transgender community. This is all the kind of like affinity groups and identity politics groups, of just bringing it to that nth degree of like, this is going to lead to genocide. Children are killing themselves over comedy, which is
right.
really, really hard to believe. And
not only hard to believe,
yeah.
I'm going to say categorically untrue.
Yeah,
I
do
not buy that for a second. I think it is a ridiculous assertion, and they make these points. There's a recent article that said, they're protesting the BBC, and the protesters are all saying, BBC, you are literally killing transgender people. Not a single transgender person was murdered in the UK over the last, I think, 3 years. And they'll say, well, we're killing ourselves. And I go, okay, but we don't know. The thing killing you is not the BBC airing a special about you. I really don't believe that. But that is the claim. And again, it's this, I can take seriously the transgender community telling me, well, we are marginalized and we feel these jokes are hurting us. Okay. But I can't take you seriously when you say that this discussion it's a matter of life or death. It's not, and it will never be. And you bring up these activists. I mean, I'm going to relay an anecdote, is that I've been privately contacted by a fairly well-known transgender actor after the Chappelle protest. I'll say they're verified on Twitter. I can say that. And they said to me, listen, a lot of these people who come out here, that woman who was leading the protest, these people are in it for the fame and the money. They have made activism their profession, and they do not truly represent the voices of the actual transgender community. The average transgender person is not mad at Chappelle. We do not think Chappelle is trying to kill people. And frankly, this woman does not speak for us. And I think you're going to hear that from a lot of transgender people. There is a activist class that, again, I think they have adopted this as their tribalism and their way of relating to the world and finding targets that are acceptable. And then I think there's the average transgender person that goes, listen, man, I just want to be left alone. When I walk into a store, I know which bathroom I'm allowed to use and why. And I think those concerns that they have are totally reasonable, and they're being drowned out by a bunch of psychopaths.
Yeah, I think you see here a case where the behavior completely demonstrates the motivations pretty clearly. So you have a group of people that want to just live peaceably. And so, of course, it's not their concern to say, oh, let's cancel this Dave Chappelle special because that's going to make me not be able to live my life. They know that. But then you have another group where the agenda is completely different. It's not just their actions, it's the motivation behind it. Because my general theory, and I wonder what you would think of this, Vito, is that the activist group with the, sort of the transgender activists, not your everyday, trans person that just wants to live their life. The transgender activists, they view any nuanced discussion or even light criticism of any aspect of their ideology, because there is kind of an ideology that goes into certainly transgender activism. They view any of that criticism or discussion as a threat. So what they're actually doing is just sort of dropping these nukes, right? They have no subtlety. They immediately go like, this is killing people, because they want to squash that stuff as soon as possible so that it doesn't threaten their sort of ideological dominance in the media space.
Yeah. No, absolutely. They want to control. They've found, I don't know, I don't want to be too mean to these people, but I think a lot of them are not especially talented, interesting, intellectual people. But they found that if you're a loudmouth, activism is a very clever shortcut to get to the front of the line and be the most popular kid in the room. I mean, this Ashley Marie Preston lady who ran the Chappelle protest, I don't know if you saw what came out about her afterwards, where her Twitter account is littered with insane anti-Asian rhetoric all over and we're like, what the hell? What? Why does this woman hate Asian people? Like, it was legitimately baffling how racist this lady was. So I have to argue, I mean, I don't know if this lady truly cares. I mean, she's transgender. She must care on some respect. But is she really here leading the charge as a bleeding heart activist? Or is she here as, you know, I'm the same sort of scumbag as anybody else, and I have racist thoughts and hate in my heart, but I found a way to get a paycheck and some publicity. I mean, she was on every news network and all the interviews and everything else. A lot of people have... I don't know what's in their heart. I can't know. Maybe they truly believe that what they're doing is going to save the world. But to me, a lot of it looks like opportunism, that they finally found a place where just being a loud, angry asshole gets results.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that about that woman. I really looked into her, but that's really what you described about her. That is truly baffling. I think what's more common, because it sounds like she had some kind of genuine animus, which is very, very weird for that type of person. What I think I see more commonly that happens that is similar is that this type of person who is one of these sort of social justice activists for any number of one of the identity groups, you'll see that if you go back like 10 years on their Twitter or in their body of work, if they are an entertainer or whatever, that they made jokes or did these sort of like lighter things that would not be accepted today within their own group. And we see this all the time with some very prominent figures. I often think, well, I mean, you know, I'm going to say his name because he did piss me off this week. Ethan Klein, H3H3.
Yeah.
I mean, holy shit. I mean, I'm sorry, but
it was very unnecessary what he put out. You're talking about yesterday, disowned George.
That Peterson. And just his basically him for the past like year and a half. I mean, like everything he's done has been.
I don't know.
Kind of
you know what? And you know what I think it is. Again, so this is the LA curse. Is I live in a town. All these guys still want to make it. I mean, for the longest time, I have, you know, said, man, it would be great to be working in the mainstream entertainment apparatus, to have my work seen on television nationwide, to get a salaried writer's position, and the Writers Guild negotiates very favorable rates. If you're a writer in Hollywood, you're living the dream. The problem is that these people have to play this insane game that I can't play it. I'm not that guy. There's some guys who can just shut the fuck up and go, I support every social thing that comes my way. I want every albino midget to have free health care in college for the rest of their life. Okay. Like, yeah, I love all these pie in the sky ideas as well. And I even consider myself a bleeding heart liberal who wants to find the good in people and give everyone every opportunity and welfare and whatever else. Okay. But I also think Dave Chappelle should be able to make fun of transgender people. And that's enough to frankly get you in trouble and get you kicked out of that sphere. So when I see Ethan Klein, a guy who I think also has had great success on the internet, but I think has probably always been envious of those who are able to exist in the more mainstream entertainment spheres, which I think he's tried to break into for a period of many years. When I see him walking back interviews and disowning previous guests, his new, you know, co-host is famed socialist, whatever the hell, Hassan Asabi. I go, I know what he's doing. He's saying there's no other upward mobility other than for me to play this game, to worm my way into this particular sphere, which only values activism above all things. And I think that's his play, is that he's making a play to try and break into some sort of mainstream consciousness. Because internet fame is one thing, but I think even the internet guys, they all want to be on TV. They all want a movie. They want to talk. He probably wants a late night show. And this is the plan that he wants to get there. Again, maybe I am assuming the worst of people, and maybe he really just had this bizarre change of heart where he regrets everything he ever did and really thinks that he somehow contributed to the rise of, as he says, the alt-right or white supremacy or whatever else. But I look at it more cynically and I go, this is a guy who either A, is making a very calculated career decision, or B, has really just bought into the rhetoric and thinks that the only way for him to move forward and have friends is to atone and fit into this box.
I think it can be a little of both. I'd say it's like 90% A, 10% B. And what I mean by that is I think you can kind of, there's a saying that it's very hard to get yourself to truly believe anything on which your paycheck depends on you not believing. I sort of butchered it, but people get the gist of that statement. I forget the original person who said it. But I think that people have a tendency to kind of con themselves into sort of, at least on the surface level, believing some of this stuff when subconsciously they might know that a lot of it is bunk, because they know that they have to kind of assume that identity and at least appear to believe in this stuff, as you were saying, for upward mobility when it comes to career, to fit into a social group. The thing with Ethan that really gets to me is just like, this is a guy who gleefully said the N-word on his show a couple times.
Which is why I find it cynical and possibly manipulative, but I don't know. Has he had a change of heart, or has he ran the numbers in his head? I don't actually know.
Yeah, it strikes me as so greedy too. When you have, what does he have? 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube. His podcast is one of the biggest podcasts in the world. And he's like willing to prostrate himself in order to be even more successful, even though he's wildly successful, but it's beyond the wildest dreams of pretty much everyone who's ever clicked create channel on YouTube. It really strikes me as just a shame that people are willing to prostrate themselves because they want to be even more successful when they've already achieved a level of success that is, I don't know,
unfathomable. Well, that's why, again, when we see Dave Chappelle, who goes, you know what, I don't care what you guys say. I'm going to be true to myself, even if it is politically inconvenient. And a lot of people go at him and they go at, J.K. Rowling, and they go, oh, why are they doing this? Like, they're so rich and what? No, it's specifically because they're rich that they have the opportunity to do it, that they can speak out without worrying. I mean, even at this point in my life, I have to worry about being canceled. I have a modicum of success. I make a slight amount of ad revenue from YouTube, and I have some supporters who are helping put a couple ducats in the bucket and keep me alive. But if at any point the mainstream apparatus really wanted to put out a bunch of hit pieces, get my YouTube pulled, thankfully, I don't think I've said anything too crazy, but they always seem to somehow manifest something out of thin air, or find something you said 12 years ago and take it completely out of context. So I have to be thankful that there's guys like Dave Chappelle who can go out and say, look, I know you guys don't want us to joke about this, but unfortunately, you don't control what I say. And he kind of, he helps change the national conversation, where the rest of us can go, well, he's kind of got a point. And if I can't agree with Dave Chappelle, I mean, again, one of the greatest comedians of all time, you're going to say I'm a bigot for saying the same things as him. God bless him for standing up, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Well, and it sucks to see a guy like Ethan, who's in the same cushy position, yet refuses to do the same.
Yeah, well, and I even have to say, unfortunately, I did see in the Associated Press, Vito, the very prominent and reputable Associated Press, that you were shouting obscenities at the gays. I mean, that was right. A completely true and accurate accounting. I mean, I only say that anyway, for anyone who doesn't know, that is not what Vito did. That was something the Associated Press said he did, which he did not do, and they eventually corrected it, as I understand it. But I bring that up because, and that was a case where somebody did try to misrepresent you in a way that was reputationally and professionally damaging.
Yes. The Associated Press put out a little photo caption. And because it's the Associated Press, it means hundreds of websites had this caption that said, comedian Vito Gesualdi went and yelled slurs at peaceful protesters. And I'm like, peaceful protesters? They broke my shit. They punched my buddy in the face. That was the least peaceful people I thought. Going one step further, the Antifa newspapers, which I didn't even know existed. I didn't know these people knew how to work a typewriter, these goons, put out that we were there strangling people. And I'm like, what nightmare world do we live in? Do I look like a strangler? Wow. I only strangle with consent. If someone asks nicely, okay, maybe. But for the most part, I am not a strangler. And I stand by that stance. So yeah, this is again, we're talking about this realm of misinformation. All it takes to destroy someone is a lie, a convenient lie, a well-placed lie. A crying woman does a lot of good work these days, not to be misogynist. You get a lot of these ex-girlfriends or whatever coming out of the woodwork and claiming a lifetime of abuse. You never know what's going to cancel you. And it's they only cancel the people that they think are the what do you call it? They cancel us because they're afraid of us and they're afraid of what we'll say. And that's why they go digging into your personal history and they try to dig up whatever they can, because they don't like the idea that you can speak your mind and that you're rational and that you have good takes. It terrifies them to their core a lot of the time. And that's why they have to lie to destroy you, because they can't destroy you any other way.
Yeah. And on that note, I think I'm going to title this episode and put the quote as "I only strangle with consent." I'm afraid
I only strangle with consent. That's going to be my book. My book is going to be me with wearing the gloves, the OJ gloves, and holding them up. Yeah.
There's a guy who almost canceled himself. It's hilarious.
Well, yeah. I think that man was fairly canceled, but he's not even canceled anymore. He came back.
Yeah.
OJ is having the time of his life.
He seems to try as hard as he can to put himself back in jail. It's funny. I don't know. We won't get into the OJ thing. It's
a lot to cover.
But in any case, yeah, this is something that rings very true to me, that what you said about this perception of it. It's really crazy. And it's interesting to talk to you as somebody who's kind of a critic of entertainment media, because it is such an important space in our culture. And it's sort of been infected to where anything that is viewed as not going along with this ideology, which generally the word that seems to have stuck is wokeness, for better or worse. It seems like everything that you said is perceived as a threat is, there's an attempt to bring it down. And it seems like we've seen this seep into a large percentage of, I guess I want to ask you, do you think that, to what extent, I'd be very surprised if you said you didn't think this has happened at all, but feel free to say that if you believe it. But to what extent do you think pretty much all entertainment media, the kind of things you discuss in your channel, video games, movies, TV, comedy, to what extent do you think they've kind of been compromised by this ideology as art forms? Because I know that in the comedy world, I'm constantly hearing that you can't even go to clubs and generate these relationships. You were just saying kind of in the film world, and we actually see it manifest in the art itself. I mean, I could go on I know you've done a whole thing, although you were more substantive with your stuff about Star Wars, but I could go on a whole thing about how Star Wars was filled with crap that seemed very transparently kind of in your face, identity politics oriented. To what extent do you think broadly in the entertainment world, this stuff has started to kind of ruin the art itself?
100%. I mean, what are we even talking about? It's funny you bring this up, because yesterday I went on my podcast, The Biggest Problem in the Universe. You can find it at biggestproblem.show. And I brought it. It's a podcast where every week we bring in different problems. We debate which of them is the true problem. And my problem was this forced diversity. And in film, I specifically focused on. Now, I know forced diversity is a buzzword a lot of people disagree with. They go, well, it's not being forced. This is a choice. I mean, people are making a creative decision. I hate to say it. It's forced. It is now studio mandated. Right now, for the Oscars, in order to qualify for the Best Picture Oscar, there is a list of requirements, and you have to meet at least 2 out of the 4 diversity categories, or you are not allowed to have your picture nominated for Best Picture. One of which is at least half the cast needs to be either gay, black, underprivileged, whatever, half the cast, or your crew needs to be 50% diverse behind the camera. You need a gay director. You read the list of what they want, and you're like, is this how we make art now? Like, what are we talking about? You do not make art with a checklist of how 30% women, 10% Native American. You got to have 1 Eskimo in there. It's insanity. And it's not just the Oscars. I was also reading the exact same requirements at Amazon Studios, only soliciting bids for, you can't even, your lighting. You have to purchase your lighting from either a transgender person or a woman-owned business, a black-owned business. At least half of your camera supplies have to be diverse. So we've truly reached the point where, and my greatest fear and my greatest concern, let me wrap this back around. With the Netflix protest, the demands of the protesters were, and they try to make it sound very reasonable. They go, we do not want to cancel Chappelle. We do not want to remove his special. What we want is for you guys to appoint to the Creative Control Board 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 20. I don't know how many transgender people should be on your board of content. Well, okay, I know what you're doing, and everyone knows what you're doing, because you know that Dave Chappelle is too big to cancel. Any man who can make $50 million for a network by putting out one comedy special, money cannot be canceled. It does not matter. O.J. Simpson would have a late night show if you pulled in the money. Okay, like the system does not care. But you want to get into these positions because you know that you can't stop Chappelle, but you can stop the next Chappelle. You can stop the up and coming guy who doesn't have a name for himself, who doesn't have the money, who might be extremely funny, extremely talented, could have the whole world laughing, but you are in a position to stamp it out before it begins because you're on the board and you can go, you know what? This guy's a little too toxic. Let's not give him a comedy special. His proposal for his TV show, let's just throw it in the trash. And that's what these people are up to. And that's what we see at all of these companies. And it's the reason we've gone down this rabbit hole of, you ask, well, why are people bending over backwards for these people? It's because these people have found their way into the organizations. You know, right now, Facebook has a content control board. Twitter has a, whatever you want to call it. They all have different names, diversity officers and everything in between. And nobody wants to fire these people because, again, the optics, you look like a bigot and a psychopath. Nobody wants to tell these people what to do for the same optics reasons. And they just continue to spread their frankly flawed ideology to the point where they show up at the boardroom meeting and they go, from now on, half of our productions have to have a gay black man as the co-star. And it's too late to tell them no because they've worked their way up the ladder. And that's what terrifies me, is that we are entering a world where there's one of these people in every organization, and they're going to continue to drag down entertainment, free thought, tech. Everything is going to be brought down by these people because what they're preaching is frankly insanity.
Yeah, and the bad thing about this ideology is you really only need 1 or 2 people to spread it to a whole organization or a whole body. The
Yes.
tactics that they use are so nuclear and so toxic and so kind of brilliant when you really think about it, because they work one way or another.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they know if you fire them, you know what happens? There's a Medium article, there's an uproar. This company inspires a culture of abuse. It does not care about its marginalized employees. We need to boycott. The employees need to unionize. You're seeing it happen right now with Activision Blizzard. I don't know if you've been following that at all.
A little bit. I know that there was something with sexual harassment.
Yes.
I don't really remember exactly.
So there was some level of sexual harassment from some of the guys within the company, which absolutely should be addressed. But that narrative is now turned into that this was a culture of abuse and everyone working there was molesting each other or whatever else. And if you start to dig into the accusations, like one of the accusations is, well, these guys were horrible abusers because they had a hotel party where they hung a picture of Bill Cosby on the wall. And at first blush, you go, well, that sounds terrible. How could you? That's very offensive. And you found out it happened in 2013. Well before any allegations were public. And at that point, I think the majority of Americans looked at Bill Cosby and went, oh, that's that funny comedian, it's funny. He wears funny sweaters. And they're trying to say, no, these guys are perverts and sexual abusers and had Bill Cosby parties. And it just isn't true. Again, this misinformation, it spreads so quickly. And these people know how to weaponize it. They know how to get their followers behind a thing, and they can cause legitimate economic damage to a business. And I think that's why a lot of businesses just go, you know what, just give them what they want. And I don't think they see that maybe in the short term that protects their profits, but in the long term, it's just going to come back to bite them in the ass.
Yeah, it gets pretty extreme where you're seeing these people work their way up in companies. One thing that I just remembered, this is something from I think it was about 2 years ago, and I don't know what kind of ended up being the end result of this, but I don't know if you remember this, Vito. What I remember seeing, I think it was like Twitch, the corporate entity of Twitch has like a trust and safety team. And one of the people on that team was a person who believed they were a deer.
Right.
And this person was put in charge of like a legitimate position where they are deciding what's going on this website. And I'm gonna say something that maybe is very provocative right now on my show, because I feel like it is my obligation to you, the listeners and viewers. If somebody came to a company I owned and said, I truly and well believe that I am a deer, I would not hire them on the basis of them believing that they are a deer.
I'm going to go one step further. And this is truly bigoted. I have no concern for the well-being of the deer community. I really don't. I don't. Maybe you guys are facing a lot of adversity. You just want to graze in the fields and farmers keep chasing you off. It sounds terrible, but unfortunately, I can't bring myself to care for it.
Well, and the funny thing is, this is something that, there's a certain type of person, it's not the kind of person who watches this show, thankfully, but, there's a certain type of person that's going to make a big deal of this. There was a controversy over people making fun of this woman. I'm going to say woman because I honest to God don't remember. And it's just like, that is really a great example of how there really is no end point unless that we make an end point, unless society kind of comes together and says, okay, enough. And that leads me to another question I wanted to make sure I asked you today, Vito, which is, what would you, this is something I try to do on the show, is always ask people about solutions, what they actually want to see in these situations. What would you like to see more of in regards to this type of issue in terms of censorship, forced diversity? What do you want to see from people in the commentary community, content creators, consumers? What do you think is a potential solution to this problem, or something that could help fix it?
My belief is that these organizations have already been taken over. The damage has already been done. People ask me, do you think comedy's dead, or comedy is dying? Comedy is dead. I'm sorry, it has happened. Now, can it be undone? Can it be brought back from the dead? Yes. And my belief is that we have an obligation as a society to support people who are outside the mainstream and fighting against this kind of thing. So right now, we have always believed, and somehow we have allowed this mainstream media apparatus to have all the control. And we don't have to do that. We now exist, I would say, in the bravest new age since the invention of the printing press, where anybody can step forward and have their voices heard. The only problem is that we live in a capitalist society. Now, that is not a critique of capitalism, and I love capitalism. But one of the pratfalls of capitalism is that in order to stay alive, you have to put food on the table, and the commissar is not going to do it for you. So what I tell people is, if you have found a voice somewhere in this sphere that you think is doing good work, perhaps a podcaster, a Veritas type of gentleman, whatever, or a big loudmouth like Vito, or anybody that you think has a valuable voice in this conversation, and even if that voice is just providing comedy or entertainment, whatever, anything outside of the mainstream that is not going to get funding from these big companies, the bravest and most powerful thing you can do is use the power of capitalism to put $1 in that man's pocket. Patreon is the most exciting thing in the world for me. And it has been a huge boon to me that I can look at Patreon and go, I no longer have to bite my tongue to hide in fear of these social justice monsters, whatever you want to call them, that I can speak my mind knowing that I have an audience that understands me and supports me. And I try to pay it forward as well. If I go on Patreon, there are dozens of podcast creators, whatever else, where it's not always, look, I'm not a rich man. I might only give them $1, $2 a month, but that adds up. It really does. And I just keep wanting to preach to people that a lot of people have this extreme aversion to the idea of giving anyone money because they've been conditioned to believe that someone's going to scam them. That has been a function of capitalism, that a lot of the times that you are separated from your money, you are not getting a fair exchange. When you buy a $120 pair of Nike sneakers, that probably cost them $15 to make. But I'm going to argue that every dollar you give to a creator, you are receiving far greater than the value of what you're putting in that person's pocket. It is a benefit to you to give them that money, because the entertainment and the just the voice you're going to get out of that, the impact on society far outweighs the monetary cost of what you're putting in. And this is not me, again, grifting for money. You don't have to give me $1. I don't care. But if there's somebody that you care about who you think's doing good work, I implore you, if you can afford it, to fund the revolution, because it's really the only way we can do it. The people who have all the power right now have the money, the movie studios and the commentators and the late night, whatever, whoever it is, that is power. But you have that same power in your pocket, and figure out how to use it wisely.
I think this is a very important message, Vito, and I thank you for saying that, because yeah, it's vital. As you said, Patreon, with the level of censorship that occurs on YouTube, demonetization, with the level that is occurring on other platforms. I mean, heck, on Twitter, if you say that a man can't be a woman, you get kicked off. But
right.
You know, and I mean, even Patreon has kicked a couple people off, but they seem to have been relatively stable, you know, for a while now. It is very important that independent creators are being supported, and I thank you for saying that. And I actually want to ask you: do you think there are there any creators you want to kind of single out, groups that you want to single out? I know I have some that come to mind who you think are creating like stuff that is still risky and vital and pushes boundaries despite the environment that we're in. Because that's actually, I know this is, you know, the hashtag stunning and brave thing gets kind of old, but I think it's genuinely brave when I see certain creators who are still making truly, genuinely risky art and content. Are there any people that you feel like you're still getting that from despite the environment that we're in?
Yeah, well, I look at a guy like Sam Hyde, a comedian, who he was within the mainstream apparatus of Adult Swim, and he had his own TV show, and he was very specifically kicked off for his political views, and he's managed to thrive in the aftermath of that. And they hate this man. They hate that he is able to thrive. All of the mainstream hates that for the longest time they had the power. They were the tastemakers. They controlled who you heard. And the internet has made it so that is no longer the case. So Sam Hyde's a great one. He's not on Patreon because I believe he's been banned from there. But even there, he's been able to make his own independent funding. I want to say it's samhyde.tv, but you'd have to Google it. He's a great one. And I also have a friend of mine, Mr. Girl, who is on Patreon, has dealt with having his channel banned from YouTube. He's constantly on the edge of being canceled. I think Mr. Girl makes some of the most thought-provoking, interesting content right now. And I am very proud. I've supported that man for years, not just as a friend, but as a creator. Honestly, I look at his content and it puts me to shame what he's putting. I'm like, oh my God, I wish I was making things as deep and thought-provoking as this man. Other than that, I mean, I support a lot of other comedy channels. Even guys who not necessarily are having an impact on the political conversation, but just these are guys who Hollywood hates that they have to compete with them. Red Letter Media is my favorite movie review show. And I'm sure that the mainstream apparatus hates that these guys come out and they say, well, this Star Wars movie sucks. You know, they're interrupting these big marketing pushes to push some of these woke progressive films in the audience and exposing, well, this just sucks. You know? So I love those guys. But really, it can be as small as you want. An example I give is I went to a comic convention 2 weeks ago, and I spent the entire comic convention walking around, and anyone who had a comic for sale, some little rinky-dink creator, $5 comic, I went, so I don't even need to look at it, sell it to me. I don't care. And I probably bought a dozen comics. Most of them are fucking terrible. But it doesn't matter, because they're creating something outside, and who knows, they may go on to make the next great independent comic. So I don't care if they're just starting out or they're you know, figuring it out. Just the idea that they're existing outside the mainstream sphere and making that into a legitimate sphere into which others can enter and have success has value. So however you want to support independent creators, you're a saint for doing so. I really believe that. Like a lot of people think, I don't know what they think when I say that, but I really think the most powerful thing you can do is find these people and give them $1. And you should, again, not leave that situation going, I can't believe that guy scammed me out of $1. Come out of this situation. It's charity at this point. You have supported one of the greatest charities right now. I mean, granted, you could probably donate to some sick kids as well. Maybe that's a little more.
They should make Patreon tax deductible. That's what we're saying.
Well, they honestly should. It kind of is. I don't know. It has such value to me. I am so excited about Patreon and all the alternative ways of funding this stuff, because for the first time in the history, again, since the printing press, the average man can have a voice and not be silenced by this media apparatus. And it is incredible to see. It warms my heart.
Yeah, I think that's a great place for us to start to wrap up. I do want to give one shout out. One of the places I saw you, Vito, after the Dave Chappelle thing was the Legion of Skanks podcast, which is something that I listen to religiously.
Yes.
Those are great guys, really, really funny, and really, I mean, they go out of their way to be offensive, but it is hilarious.
And they have also been censored. I know personally that they have.
Definitely.
They know they are being censored by the mainstream apparatus just for being so funny. It's crazy. It's nonsense.
Yeah. So yeah, check them out if you want some really funny comedy. Check out some of the people Vito was talking about. Please check out Vito's channel. Vito, go ahead and plug anything that you're doing, your Twitter, your YouTube, whatever the hell, your Patreon. Let people know where they can find you and support you.
I'm all over the place, but the best place to find me is always youtube.com/Vito. I also have a second channel on there. If you want this kind of political discussion and current events, search for Vito 2 on YouTube. You're going to find a lot of that kind of daily videos. And of course, I have to plug my podcast with the great Dick Masterson over at biggestproblem.show. You can also find it on YouTube. Our podcast is The Biggest Problem in the Universe weekly show. A ton of fun. And I want you guys to check it out and check out all the other people we mentioned. And again, it doesn't matter who it is. If there's a channel you watch, a podcast you listen to, really sit down and think, can I give these guys a cup of coffee a month? It goes so much further than you could ever know.
All right, folks, thanks so much for listening. Thank you, Vito, for being here. If you are listening to this show on iTunes, please leave a 5-star review and follow the podcast. Same thing, Spotify, all the other audio platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you guys next time on the Veritas podcast.